Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. I'm a guy, which is why this is more funny to me that this happened rather than I'm scared for my life. But it's still creepy. I was at the flea market by the end of Walmart when a guy who was around like 50, kind of overweight, and had dark gray hair. He first encountered me when we were towards the front of the store. I'm not a social person, so when he greeted himself to me randomly, I thought that it was quite weird. I also thought that the way he was looking at me was weird. Around 10 to 15 minutes later in the store, the man came up to me again and said, "I'm new here. Do you know where the bathroom is?" And I thought that this was super weird, considering he walked past many people to say this to. And I said something like, "Well, I haven't been here before, so I don't know. I think it's over there." And then he walked away. I'm very judgmental to people and even told myself that maybe I was just looking into it too much. But I knew to keep my distance from this guy. At this point, I was almost done in the store and I didn't see him again until I got into my car. He must have been watching because where he was at in the store for him to walk out was the complete opposite side, and he walked out like 20 seconds after me. He's staring at me the entire time that he walked out, and then he waved, and at this point, I thought he was an undercover cop trying to keep an eye on me the way that he was looking at me the entire time. So, as I am pulling off, he is still staring at me in the middle of the parking lot, and I look in my side mirror. But he's standing there, staring and sucking on his index finger and waving me to come back. I wish I would have recorded him or gone back to see who he was, but I was just too in shock, and I just drove off. Should I report this to the store? Or what should happen? Honestly, I feel like people need to be aware of this guy. This happened when I was about 12 or 13. For important context, I live in an apartment complex that was 2 sets of rows, and each row with 4 apartments, and I lived in the apartment closest to the street of one row, and I had 2 cousins that live in the apartment at the very end of the row in the back. I would hang out with them just about daily. We were very into soccer at that time, and we would walk to a park about 4 or 5 streets away along with some of the neighborhood kids and play soccer there. Now, I say neighborhood kids, but it was a big group of about 15 kids in total, and the ages ranged from about 10 years old all the way to 17. One of my 2 cousins was the 17-year-old, which is why my parents allowed me to go without their supervision. So, on this day, like usual, we made our way to the park. Some of us would walk, some would ride scooters or skateboards, and I had my bike that day. We get to the park and we start playing. About halfway through our game, my parents drive by and they call to me from our car. They tell me that they are going to the store and to wait at the park for them. Okay, no big deal. I figure that they must want to go somewhere else afterwards, and it's easier to pick me up from the park than for me to wait back at the house. Of course, this doesn't make sense because it's a 4-street distance, but at that time, to my 12-year-old mind, it was perfectly logical. We keep playing for about another hour. Then as we get closer to sunset, more and more kids started making their way back to their house. When my cousins wanted to leave, they asked me if I was ready, and I said that my parents told me to wait for them here, so they left and I stayed behind. Eventually, it was just me. No big deal. I'm familiar with the neighborhood and I have my bike and the energy of a 12-year-old. So, I start riding my bike up and down the street, just killing time. At this point, it hasn't occurred to me that if my parents wanted me to wait for them at the park, they wouldn't want me to wait past sunset. Eventually, I get impatient and hungry, but not wanting to get grounded for disobeying my parents, I just kept waiting. Except, instead of waiting at the park, I crossed the street and I was waiting there. After a few minutes, a car drove up and stopped next to me. It's nothing scary yet. There's a stop sign there, so I don't really pay it much mind. Except when it drove away, I realized that the car looked weird. It was old and boxy, like an 80s car. But what stood out was that it looked spray-painted gray. It was definitely not real car paint or done by a professional. I don't know if someone who stole a car would be dumb enough to draw that much attention to it, or if the look was intentional. But you could tell that it was just spray-painted all over. Anyway, it drove away and I kept waiting, annoyed now. But then, the car comes back from the other side of the street. I noticed it because it was hard to ignore at that point, but my survival instincts are still not kicking in. Maybe they were lost or just wanted to turn around without doing a U-turn. And since the park is a big square, going around it and coming back is easy enough to do. A few minutes go by, and they drive up again, and they stop at the stop sign. And this time, I am starting to get nervous, so I look at the car. There are two men inside, very scruffy looking, unkempt beards, unkempt hair, dirty faces, stains on their shirts. And they look at me. They both smile at the same time, and they look at each other, smile even bigger, in the creepiest smile that I have ever seen someone do to this day. And then they drove away. Their smile creeped me out so much that I was now on high alert. In particular, I was watching the other side of the park where they would come from if they went around again like they did the first time. And sure enough, they did. This also means that they were now on the same side of the street as me. So, as soon as I saw the car, I jumped on my bike and I rode as fast as I humanly could. I could hear one yelling something, but I honestly don't know what it was, and I was too busy riding for my life. I could hear the car catching up, but I was too scared to even turn around, and I somehow made it to my street and ran into the building, but I didn't want them seeing where I lived, since my apartment would have been the one visible from the street. So, I went to the back behind my cousin's apartment, and then I hid there. My reasoning was, if they followed me inside the building, they would see me knocking on their door and get me before anyone answered. Worth noting, if it wasn't obvious, this was before cell phones. I waited for what felt like a few hours, but it was probably only 20 minutes or so before I got enough courage to make the short walk down the row of apartments to mine, and I tried the door. It was unlocked, so I went inside, and my parents were there, sitting on the couch watching TV, and they asked me how our game was, completely nonchalantly, and I questioned them and asked them why they didn't pick me up. They both looked confused. They asked me why they would tell me to wait there instead of home when it's a 4-street difference and that I had my bike with me. And once they said that, it did make more sense. But to this day, I swear that they told me to wait there for them. They explained that when they drove up, they told me that they were going to leave the door unlocked for me in case I got home before they did. In my excitement of the game, I must have just completely misheard them. I simply went to my room after that, never telling them about it, because I'm a dumb kid. I knew that if I said something, they wouldn't let me go play soccer anymore, and that was clearly more important than my physical well-being. I never saw those guys or that car ever again. I look back on it now, and it doesn't matter how fast I was pedaling my bike. They were in a car. They should have and could have caught up if they wanted to. So, I don't know what their intentions were. If they were just having a laugh at my expense, if they were trying to scare me, or if they actually had something darker in mind. But I do think back on that day now, and I get chills every time that I realize how much different my life would be right now if they had caught me. So, to the two creepy men in the spray-painted car, let's not meet again. So, I always take the same train to work. It's a 30 to 45-minute ride, and I started to notice this one man that is always there in the morning. I don't know if it's just in my head or this man is a real creep. I noticed him around 2 to 3 months ago. At first, I didn't think much of it. I always thought that he was just annoyed that I always put my bag next to me and put my feet on this little thing next to the seat. But pretty soon, I knew it was something else. He was always staring at me when I enter the train, and he follows me with his eyes when I sit down. And then, he just continues to stare at me the whole time. I always look away from him because it's just weird, you know? He gets off at the same station as I do and stands directly behind me when I stand in front of the door, and it's really starting to freak me out. He never drives home with me, and I'm glad. But last week, my colleagues and I went out to eat, so I took the very last train. And guess who was at the main train station? Yes, him. He stood a few feet from me, but he didn't look away from me for like 20 minutes. We were alone in that time, but after those 20 minutes, more people came and he went away from me and didn't look at me. I always think about what would have happened if the people didn't show up. As the train arrived and we got in, he walked in the same direction as me and sat down a few seats in front of me to face me. You have to know that he is maybe in his 60s and I'm not even 20, so that makes it even more disgusting. I don't know what to do about it. He continues to stare at me and stands directly behind me in the morning, and it really creeps me out and makes me uncomfortable. I'm scared that I'm eventually alone with him in the train, and if he would do something. Update. It turned out that this man was in prison for sexual assault, and the police were called a few times after he got out. I talked to the police and showed them a picture of the man, and after that, I haven't seen him in my train anymore. So, I guess I got lucky that I was never alone with him. So, I'm pretty sure that I'm overreacting when I think about it, but just in case, I'm sharing it here. Background info. I'm a 15-year-old girl, and the man in this situation was, from my view, a middle-aged Middle Eastern man. Exactly 1 week ago, I was in Sydney for the holidays, and it was my first time in the city. It was around 11 a.m., and I was walking by myself around Hyde Park, and I was tearing up. I got in a fight earlier with my mom, so I ran off trying to find a secluded area. I was kind of doing that thing where you walk fast and you try not to cry. I was walking on a street where the bus stations are, and then this man stopped me and asked if he could take my picture. At first, I was skeptical, of course. I thought that it was a scam where he would ask for money for the pics, or he was gonna do something. I was caught off guard in the moment because I was in distress, so I just stood there and I said nothing with an unsure face. But then, he whipped out his iPad and then showed me his profile on the site called Flickr. I've now searched it up and it's a photography website, so I feel kinda bad now. I saw pictures of girls smiling, and the background in the pics were the park, I think, so I felt less cautious and I asked him, "In this park, right?" And then he responded that it will just take 10 to 15 minutes and that we would go and find somewhere to take the picture. I thought about it for like 5 seconds and I ended up saying no because I wasn't in the right state of mind, and even if I was, I would have said no. But then he kept trying to say that it would only take 10 to 15 minutes and that we should go, but I just said no and I walked away. I still feel kinda bad about the whole thing because his reaction after was a kind but disappointed smile. But now that I think about it, I don't think he even had a camera. Maybe he did, but I don't remember. I was overwhelmed, and immediately after, I went into the park and I found an empty space on the grass and I started bawling. I told my family, and of course they all agreed that he had bad intentions. But I'm still really unsure about how I feel about the whole thing. What if that was an actual job? I don't think he picked me because he thought that I was a tourist or a minor, because I've gotten hit on by older guys, and some people think that I'm older than I actually am, which I can see. The fact that I was visibly vulnerable from being on the verge of breaking down, and the guy still tried to convince and talk to me, gives me the doubts, but who knows? Stuff like this has been happening to me a lot recently. I constantly get stares from people. Most are men who just act so weird around me. They either go quiet when I'm near them, or some of them try something like trying to start a conversation with me or say stuff at me. This is making me really paranoid of everyone around me, and just after all the weird encounters that have happened to me, I'm scared to go out by myself. And even when I go out with my mom, sometimes weird stuff still happens, and I just don't know what to do. I met a guy in college, and I ran one lap with him. He asked my name and I told him, and he was hitting on me, but I said no. Anyway, I was going through my emails a day later, and he sent me a schedule of when we will run together. I was shocked because to find my email in the college email system, he had to have gone through everyone who has my first name in the system. He would watch me so intensely whenever I ran or shot basketballs at the rec center. It was so intense that people actually noticed and told me. He would hide behind equipment and stare. That part was a little funny to me, at least. His hiding was terrible. He kept hitting on me in person and wouldn't take no for an answer. He grabbed me by the arm forcefully on one occasion, and another said that he was my boyfriend, which was obviously not. It's funny because I told my best friend and she didn't think anything of it. But one day, my best friend, we went to the same college. She then texts me and says to come to the dining hall, and I did. There was another girl, and I found out that this guy had a restraining order placed against him by the entire girls' soccer team. The restraining order was because he would use the same tactics against them. There is more that happened, but I'll stop it there. Have you ever looked into the eyes of someone who is truly crazy? Not someone who just does off-the-wall things or acts different, but genuinely insane. I have, and it terrified me. Let me back up. I will be vague on many details for obvious reasons, but a backstory is absolutely necessary. I work for a large corporation and I have a couple of different bosses, but the one that I formed a genuine friendship with is the one that we will call Jeff. Jeff is a very laid-back, go-with-the-flow type of guy with a great sense of humor. I also should explain that he is single with no children. Not long after I started working with the company, we became friends, and he often stops by my desk to chat. It was about a year ago that he stopped by one morning, and I immediately knew that he was not himself. He seemed distant and stressed, which is unusual for him. When I questioned what was wrong, he told me that he needed to speak with me about a situation. Of course, I was immediately concerned and I urged him to go on. He explained that a few years ago, long before I even started at the company, another woman began working at the company. She was not in our department, but did work within our company that required her to interact with leadership in our area, including Jeff. From this point on, we will call her Lauren. He explained his interactions with Lauren were not often at all, but she was polite and professional when they did need to speak. He said that she worked for the company for less than a year and then left as she announced that she was getting married and moving. And that was that. He did not encounter her again until a couple of weeks prior, when he received a friend request from her on social media. He explained that he didn't think much of it and accepted it, as he was Facebook friends with many colleagues both past and present. She then messaged him later on after accepting the request. He said that he chatted back with her initially as she seemed to just want to catch up. He learned that she had divorced and wanted to move back to our town. The conversation carried on as normal until she asked if he would join her for dinner when she came back to town to visit in a couple of days. And Jeff explained that he politely declined her offer, and at first, she took it well. But then, it all went downhill from there. He stopped responding shortly after declining the dinner invitation, and within a few hours, he received erratic and insulting messages from her. Everything from calling him a wimpy bitch to saying that she was the best thing that he could hope for, and he blew any chance with her now. He did let me read some of these messages myself right then. He honestly felt like these were drunk texts, but still bothered him, and then he blocked her. He figured that was the end of it. But how very wrong he was. She then began emailing both his personal and work email, pleading for another chance, saying that she was drunk and didn't mean it, saying that she needed to see him, and so on. I would get to read a lot of these myself when I would later be asked to print these off for him for evidence. The reason he was telling me about this that particular day was because he had received a message request from Lauren's sister saying that she needed to talk to him about Lauren and that it was urgent. He accepted and responded to who we will call Beth. Beth told him something that had snapped in Lauren when she went through her divorce, and she became fixated on a man that she called Jeff. Beth explained that she had tried to talk some sense into Lauren when everything fizzled out with the initial conversation with Jeff. But Lauren wasn't having it. Lauren told Beth that he was her soulmate and that she was going after him. All of this led to Beth explaining that Lauren had flown into our town and was staying at a hotel close to our company and was coming to see him at work. Jeff said that he had found out what Beth said to be true when he came in and found Lauren standing outside his office. She immediately ran to him when he saw him and then pulled him into an awkward hug. Jeff said that he smelled the alcohol on her and he immediately pulled away. She explained that she was here to get her old job back and needed to see him. She also brought him gifts that included gift cards, snacks, and a picture of herself. Jeff refused these gifts, but she became more forceful and insisted he keep them. Jeff got away from her shortly after saying that he had a meeting. He then went to HR to explain the situation and how he absolutely did not want her to be employed there again. He provided me with a copy of the picture she left for him and said that if I saw her anywhere around the company property, to notify security. Beth later sent Jeff a picture of Lauren dressed as a man that Lauren had sent to her, saying, "I'm wearing a disguise so I can watch him without him knowing it's me." Again, this was nearly a year ago. Things only escalated. Lauren made multiple trips back to our town, but would try to catch Jeff in the parking lot. He would find multiple letters on his vehicle from her. Sometimes they made no sense. She once left him 2 letters that said the exact same things, word for word, but one was in cursive and the other one was in print. Jeff blocked numerous email accounts only for her to make new ones, and she professed her love for him, begging him to want her. She stated that she made him her beneficiary if anything was to happen to her. She even sent emails that were clearly from her, but claimed to be other men that wanted her and needed him to release her so that she could love them instead. Again, I got to read all of this when we were printing for evidence. She eventually got his personal cell phone number somehow and began calling and texting him constantly. He would block the numbers, only for new ones to come through. This eventually ended up in court, and a protective order was granted. This did bring things to a halt for a while. Jeff was finally himself once this occurred, as he had become a shell of himself, and I really felt horrible for him. Well, that was until this week. On Monday morning, Jeff came by my desk and I could tell right away that he was not happy. And before I could say a word, he demanded to know who placed all those letters on his desk. I was confused, as I had no clue what he was talking about. I said as much, and he explained that there was a thick stack of letters and handmade Valentine cards on his desk from Lauren. We later found out that they had been stuffed under his door, and the housekeeper found them scattered on his office floor when she went to clean it. She didn't know what they were, so she just picked them up and neatly placed them on his desk. This was as troubling as it was figuring out how she got in the building in the first place. And shortly after, Jeff returned to his office to finish up some things before taking the letters to the police station. I was working away at my desk when I received a call from Jeff. Upon answering, I heard an almost panicked Jeff saying, "She's here!" He explained that he got a knock at his office door and opened it to find her on the other side grinning at him. He said that he told her that he was calling the police and slammed the door in her face and locked it. He called the police and then called me to inform me that she had been there and the police were on the way. I foolishly assumed that she'd bailed after he told him that he was calling the cops. I got up from my desk and headed down the hall to Jeff's office to check on him and wait on the police with him. But I stopped dead in my tracks when I saw her. She was sitting on the floor outside of his office door, humming to herself. And then she slowly turned her head to look at me. I can't explain the knot that formed in my stomach as our eyes locked. She looked a lot like the picture Jeff had previously given me, but her eyes were different. They were dark. There wasn't that lively spark that you often see in people's eyes. It was like they were hollow, void of any normalcy. Her lips slightly twitched up to a smile, and she then slowly turned her head back towards Jeff's door, and she resumed humming. I booked it. I absolutely darted back to my desk, and thankfully, the police arrived shortly after. She didn't put up a fight. She calmly allowed them to arrest her, and then walked away willingly with them, still humming, and they informed us after. She is still in jail for violating the protective order. Jeff and myself are both still very shaken by the experience, and I will never forget that look or her eyes, staring into an abyss of true insanity. And here's the riddle for this video. Hey everyone, this is your creepy sister. Thank you so much for watching the video. I do hope you enjoyed it. Also, don't forget to leave a like and a comment. It really helps the channel out. A big shout out to both my channel members and Patreon members. Thank you so much for taking your support to the next level. You guys are great. And again, to everyone, stay scared because your fear feeds me.